And on the 8th day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, milk cows, work all day in the fields, milk cows again, eat supper, then go to town and stay past midnight at a meeting of the school board. So God made a farmer. I need somebody with arms strong enough to wrestle a calf and yet gentle enough to deliver his own grandchild. Somebody to call hogs, tame cantankerous machinery, come home hungry, have to wait lunch until his wife's done feeding visiting ladies, then tell the ladies to be sure and come back real soon, and mean it. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to sit up all night with a newborn colt and watch it die, then dry his eyes and say, maybe next year. I need somebody who can shape an axe handle from a persimmon sprout, shoe a horse with a hunk of car tire, who can make harness out of hay wire, feed sacks, and shoe scraps, who planting time and harvest season will finish his 40-hour week by Tuesday noon, and then painin' from tractor back put in another 72 hours. So God made a farmer. God had to have somebody willing to ride the ruts at double speed to get the hay in ahead of the rain clouds and yet stop in midfield and race to help when he sees the first smoke from a neighbor's place. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody strong enough to clear trees and heave bales, yet gentle enough to yean lambs and wean pigs and tend the pink-combed pullets, who will stop his mower for an hour to splint the broken leg of a meadowlark. It had to be somebody who'd plow deep and straight and not cut corners. Somebody to seed, weed, feed, breed, and rake and disc and plow and plant and tie the fleece and strain the milk and replenish the self-feeder and finish a hard week's work with a 5-mile drive to church. Somebody who'd bail a family together with the soft, strong bonds of sharing, who would laugh and then sigh and then reply with smiling eyes when his son says that he wants to spend his life doing what Dad does. So God made a farmer.
Now, we're going to try to film the rest of the story. Investigating the life of a frontiersman like Davy Crockett requires the tedious extraction of facts from folklore. You are about to hear a Davy Crockett story that Walt Disney never told. What I am going to tell you is completely true. Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee, the song goes, as far as anybody knows, Davy Crockett never set foot in Tennessee until he was a grown man. North Carolina was his stomping ground, Piedmont, thereabouts. There are records, original documents relating to Davy Crockett and two of his older sons are still in the files of the old Lincolnton courthouse. But then the call of the wild frontier beckoned. Davy took his family up the eastern slopes of the Appalachians, down into the promised land on the other side. Now, in those days, you could strike out and claim 400 acres of land just like that. Build a cabin, the estate was yours. Improve the property a little, and a settler could automatically claim an additional 1,000 acres of land adjacent to the original 400. Well, that deal was too good for many to pass up. Legislation established real estate offices throughout the territory. The Indians were bound to peace by a recently signed treaty. So, Davy Crockett felt secure in his new homestead on the frontier. And he would probably have remained there happily ever after, except for the rest of the story. All at once, the local legislature pulled the rug out from under the settlers. Now suddenly whites were forbidden to own or to survey or even to enter the land within the so-called Indian boundary. Yet speculators had already applied for more than 1 million acres inside the restricted zone. And Davy Crockett and his family already lived inside the restricted zone. The Indians, Creeks, and Cherokees, feeling cheated by the fine print in the treaty they had signed, now learning that countless white men had overtaken the Indians' rightful territory by 1,000-plus acre chunks, were furious. And there was much talk of violence in the red communities, and quickly the talk grew into action, and among those threatened were a dozen settlers near what is now Rogersville, Tennessee, and among those 12 was Davy Crockett. And one night when Davy's son John was away from the homestead, the Indians did attack. Davy and his wife tried to fight them off. She was killed in the raid, and so was he. That's right, Davy Crockett died in an Indian massacre in the spring of 1777. Now, for Davy's son John, who was not at home that night, he lived to tell and to father a son of his own, whom he named after his beloved father, the first of the Crocketts to venture into Tennessee. Our researchers have confirmed irrefutably that it was another Davy Crockett whom you know. I said it was another Davy Crockett whom you have lionized, and who died at the Alamo. That was the grandson namesake of the frontiersman that you've just met. Davy's daddy, the Irish settler, who in fact scaled the Appalachians, he left it for posterity to write the rest of the story.
Modern Americans, sensitive to such labels as square and corny and old-fashioned, have tended to adopt the pseudo-sophistication of their critics. Such terms as flag waver and super patriot have been used to describe the professional red baiter, thus leaving the vast majority of genuinely loyal Americans half afraid to pledge their allegiance. Well, corny sounding or not, I think our United States of America is the most. And I don't mean the fact that our 7% of the planet's people possess more than half of all the good things. I mean, just the real estate of the United States, from sea to shining sea, is incomparable. You know, the names of old world resorts stick in our memory, but the Isle of Capri is nothing compared to Catalina. The Riviera was something only until the world discovered Carmel and Miami Beach. The Scandinavian nations have nothing to offer which our Northwest states can't duplicate. The Rhine is downright ugly compared to our beautiful Ohio. And South Pacific islands are disease-infested slums stacked up alongside those islands off our own Georgia coast. I'm fully prepared for the accusation of provincialism, but I have been elsewhere. I'm just not awed by the exotic anymore. I think more Americans should get out of their systems that passion for faraway places so that they could then see America last, but appreciate it when they do. There is no geographical grandeur anywhere to compare to our Rockies and their canyons, No desert in the world is more grand, more colorful than ours in New Mexico and Arizona, and there are retreats in the state of Arkansas many days' hike from the nearest human. Adrift on a Louisiana bayou, you're as far from civilization's influence as you would be on the upper reaches of the Amazon. What harbor in this world has more character than the fishing anchorages lining New England's coast? Irwin D. Canham said it was great to go to the moon, but nobody ever invented anything better than coming home. Philosophers of all ages have had to say that one way or another, that the quest for the bluebird of happiness leads home. Voltaire said, "Hoe in your own garden." Eddie Guest said, "There's no place like home." And of our own homeland, I believe it. There is no place like it. And now we have all this in Hawaii and Alaska, too. Let's rededicate ourselves and rediscover America and re-inspire our children to stand proud when they sing loud, "My country."
Now, the rest of the story. Is a revolution all blood and guts and guns? Or is there room for the artist, the author, the poet, the performer, the composer? At the time of our American Revolution, a gentleman named Francis Hopkinson was all of those things. He'd studied in England under painter Benjamin West, became proficient at portraits and engraving. His poetry, both humorous and serious, was widely published. A talented musician, Friend Hopkinson gave harpsichord performances. He composed. In fact, his was the first book of music published by an American composer. Well, let's see what else. He served as chairman of the Continental Navy Board between 1776 and 1778. For 3 years afterward, he held the office of Treasurer of Loans. His creative contributions to the Pine Ridge revolutionary essays, terribly effective. You know, only once did he regret having used his creativity to benefit the nation. And here's why. In 1780, Hopkinson wrote a letter to the Board of Admiralty reminding them of a particular service that he had performed as chairman, and considering it had been beyond the responsibilities of his position, he now asked that he be reimbursed. He wanted to be paid for it. So the Board of Admiralty referred Hopkinson's letter to Congress. Congress passed it along to the Board of the Treasury. Next thing you know, Hopkinson was being asked for more details in the form of a specific bill. All right, said Friend, so he produced a second document, forwarded that to James Milligan, the Auditor General, who sent it to the commissioners on the Chamber of Accounts. You're keeping track of this, I hope. He returned it to the Auditor General with advice for payment, and he returned it to the Board of Treasury with his endorsement. And the Board of Treasury? No, as a matter of fact, they objected on the grounds that no vouchers had been included with the bill and demanded a new one be submitted. And now all that you've just heard was only the beginning. And all Friend wanted, a signer of our Declaration of Independence, all he wanted was to be paid for what he considered a significant service. Where, after all, did it get him? Get him a congressional investigation. And that turmoil continued for more than a year. There were summonses and reports and tentative conclusions, and
There were reevaluations and more reports and another investigation and resignations and resolutions and more reports. And after all that was said and done, three things were apparent. Fran had indeed rendered the service he had claimed. Fran had enemies on the board of the Treasury. Where did that leave him? Here is where. Fran Hopkinson was never, ever going to be paid. You see, according to the board, the public was entitled to additional services now and then from government employees who already drew comfortable salaries. And just maybe, if Francis Hopkinson had been reimbursed for what he did, maybe we would have forgotten him. But as it happened, a seamstress named Betsy Ross absolutely, unjustifiably received credit for the accomplishment of artist Francis Hopkinson, which was the design of the American flag. And now you know the rest of the story.